In our last message, we were looking at the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They, along with their wives, were the three families that came off of the ark after the great flood. It was these three families that had repopulated the earth. And in chapter 10, last week, what we were going over is what you call the table of nations. All of the nations that have been formed in the earth, they all began with the sons and the grandsons of these three men, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Now, chapter 10 was the result of the event of chapter 11, which is our study here tonight, the event of chapter 11. And that's the Tower of Babel. That's what we're going to read about in just a minute. Now, what had taken place at this event, the Tower of Babel, resulted in the scattering of these three families into all the earth. And these three families formed all the various nations of the earth. Now, this story, the story of the Tower of Babel, has been greatly criticized. Many people believe that this is a made-up story, like a fairy tale. I found this website online called Daylight Atheism. Their motto is, nighttime is for dreaming, daylight is for action, which is a funny motto for atheists if you think about it. Nighttime is for dreaming, daylight is for action. I think that their point is that those Christians, they're in the dark. And we as atheists, well, we're in the light. Daylight is for action. This website is a discussion board where the host picks a Bible story and he puts forth his challenge to that Bible story, and hundreds of atheists, they come on and they chime in and they give their 2 cents about how ridiculous they think that Bible story is. It's pretty sad, really. And in their effort to debunk the story of the Tower of Babel, they state, and I quote, "Like many biblical stories, the Tower of Babel is a tall tale with no basis in evidence or reality. According to Genesis, God was worried that human beings would become too powerful for him to control if they learned to work together. Thus, his only choice was to keep them divided and separated, prevented from cooperating by the barriers of mutual incomprehension. So I ask, do you really believe the story of the Tower of Babel?" And then all these other guys give their answer. And my answer is, of course I believe the story of the Tower of Babel. This is the Word of God. His Word is truth. I read down through many of their comments, and all I found was that they just kept criticizing and mocking this fantastic biblical event, the Tower of Babel. But none of them had proposed any other possibilities of how the men of the earth had come to speak so many different languages. So I looked up a few places to see what the atheists do believe about the various languages of the earth. How did all these nations in the world with all of these various languages come about? How did this happen? And so listen to this. This is one view, and you're going to like this. Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould says, and I quote, "Natural selection made the human brain big." He's talking about evolution. "But most of our mental properties and potentials may be spandrels. That is, non-adaptive side consequences of building a device with such structural complexity." And he tries to explain this. He says, "In other words, our ancestors encountered environments which required the type of advanced reasoning only provided by a larger brain." And he's talking about the man's brain, right? Human brain. "However, language capability was not one of those functions for which the brain was selected. So what he's saying is that the brain evolved, but at the beginning of its evolutionary stage, it couldn't think enough to communicate. That's what he's saying. And he goes on, instead, language is a result of exapting neural structures formerly used for other functions. So the brain was only good for instinctual functions at the beginning, like sleep, eat, and go poo. That's how I figured what he's saying. So many, if not most, universal behaviors, including language, are probably spandrels, often co-opted later in human history for important secondary functions. Secondary functions like communication, like intelligible words, languages. And you know what Mr. Gold is really saying, right? He's saying that he doesn't have a clue what in the world he's talking about. And Stephen Jay Gould is believed to be one of the world's leading authorities in the study of human behavior. And you know, he made up the term spandrels. He says it's spandrels within the brain. He did it. He was the first one to coin that word. He made it up. It's from an architectural term that speaks of a part of building blocks. And you know what he's doing, right? He's flat out guessing. And he's trying to make it seem really scientific-like. He doesn't have a clue on how the various languages came to be in the world since he's rejected the God of truth. He can only guess while he sits in the darkness, I might add. Someone needs to tell Mr. Gold that nighttime is for dreaming. Can you imagine the early Neanderthal cavemen with this brain that didn't know how to think or to reason enough to speak or to communicate in an intelligent manner in the same way that we do today? The atheists, they say, yes, of course that's possible. It's just like the baby's brain that needs to develop. The baby's brain evolves from birth until it becomes an intelligent man or an intelligent woman. And why shouldn't we think that the brain evolved? And I'd say, okay, but can you imagine a baby surviving in the wilderness? If it can't reason enough to communicate, then how is the childlike brain going to clothe itself or build a fire or find some shelter? Babies don't do that. They depend solely upon the intelligence of mama and papa. That's another one you could throw out to the evolutionist also. You could ask them, in your debate against evolution, whenever it was that some species evolved into man, at whatever time that was, it must have evolved into a full-grown person. Because babies could never survive on their own without the care of mama and papa. An adult man must have almost suddenly appeared from the dust of the ground as a fully intelligent being if he were to have any chance at all for survival. Do you know what the name Babel means? Just like it sounds. It means confusion, babbling. I think Mr. Gold's theories don't challenge the scriptures at all. They don't give a reasonable explanation at all as to how languages came about in the world. And that's not pure science. Stephen Jay Gould is not making his theories from a factual observance or observable evidence. He's doing what we're doing. He's using, listen to this, he's using faith. But his faith is based in the presupposition that there is no God. That's the base of his theories. He tries to explain everything, and I mean everything in the world without God being a part of his reasoning. Now, our faith is based in the presupposition that God not only exists, but he's reasonably told us what's happened. We have his word on it. He told us how everything was created, who created it, how it got messed up, how he judged it, and how he restored it. And that's just where we're at so far in the book of Genesis. And then how he confounded all the languages of the world, forming all these various nations and languages in the world. We know what we know because God told it to us from his word. And they know what they know because they made up some words and they made up some stories and they drew some cartoons and they guessed at what happened, and then they call it science. And they tell us we're ridiculous. And we're both operating by faith. It's just that our faith is in God, and their faith is in the absence of God. And that's what the word atheist means. A theist is one who believes in God, or a God, and the a prefix means without or absent. They call themselves the no God group. But let's look now at the story itself, where God tells us exactly what happened. In Genesis 11:1, it reads, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there." Where it reads that they dwelt in the land of Shinar, the they is the families of the sons of Noah. They all spoke the same language. And what language was that? Some people believe that it was Hebrew, but we really can't be too sure. It says also that they went from the east, or from Mount Ararat, and that's where they came out of the ark, remember? And they settled in the area of modern-day Iraq in a city known as Babel. They formed the city. Now, Babel, I believe, must be the oldest city in the world. Eden wasn't really considered to be a city, but more of a garden region. And Cain, he settled in the land of Nod. That's what it says back there in Genesis chapter 4. But that's not really a city again, but more of a region. Most secular historians claim that the city of Damascus in Syria is the oldest known city. They say it was established somewhere between 10,000 BC and 8,000 BC. But since we take the Bible to be literal, the earth can't be more than about 6,000 years old. Also, Noah and his family came off of the ark in around 2800 BC. And so there's no cities mentioned in the earth before the flood. There can't be any cities in the world older than about 2800 years. And it's clear that this city in our story, the city of Babel, is the oldest city in the world. So giving any other city mention is not accurate. In verse 3 it reads, "And they said one to another, 'Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, 'Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth.' And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. And therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth." So let's go back over this story. In the plain of Shinar, there wasn't any stones for building. There wasn't any rock quarry where they could go cut stones out of the side of a mountain to build there. So they made their own bricks out of mud and sand, and they baked them to harden them. And some people believe that the slime that they used for mortar was probably bitumen, which is a tar or an asphalt type of substance of Asia Minor used in ancient times as mortar. Now, I believe that this whole building project was headed up by the man Nimrod. Remember him? And he was the aggressive hunter before the Lord that we read about last week in chapter 10. In verse 4, where they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." I believe that what they were saying is, let us form our own government apart from the rule of the God of heaven. Remember that the first thing that Noah did when he came off of the ark was he built an altar to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there, coming right out of the ark, offering all the clean animals in abundance. And once this group of people get away from the ark and settle a little further down the Euphrates River, then they make their first attempt to build a society where God was totally excluded. It sounds much like the societies today when they attempt to separate church from state, or how most Americans interpret that phrase, to separate church and state, and they say that's to completely take God out of every possible public arena. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if within the next 4 years you see a new bill coming out, like the $20 bill or the $10 bill, with our current president's face on that currency, on the new currency. I read in a news article just yesterday that currently on display at Boston's Bunker Hill Community College in their art gallery is a painting featuring President Barack Obama with a crown of thorns on his head in a Christ-like pose likened to the crucifixion. Artist Michael D'Antuona has entitled this painting "The Truth." D'Antuona said, and I quote, "We should celebrate the fact that we live in a country where we are given the freedom to express ourselves." He continued, "The crucifixion of the president was meant to be metaphorical. My intent was not to compare him to Jesus." Well, his statement definitely contradicts his painting. I don't know, maybe it was meant to make Obama out to be greater than Jesus. I don't know. Also, just this month in November at the 2012 Soul Train Awards, comedian and actor Jamie Foxx opened up the ceremony by asking the audience, and I quote, "to give an honor to God and our Lord and Savior, Barack Obama." Jamie Foxx received a backlash of criticism from both the right and the left parties, but this man worship is not too surprising, really. Many godless societies around the world tend to deify their governmental leader, to make their president or their dictator out to be a god above other men. Today, Juche, I think that's how you say it, Juche is no longer just an ideology, but is the full-fledged religion of North Korea that worships Kim Il-sung as God, and his son, Kim Jong-il, as the Son of God. That's the country's religion. In 2005, David Hawk, the respected human rights investigator, interviewed 40 North Korean escapees about the religion in North Korea. Here are some of the responses about North Korea's religion. One former North Korean said, according to Party Covenant Article 1, Section 1, all North Koreans are required to worship Kim Il-sung with all of our heart and might, even after his death. He's been dead for some time. Another claims that we must hang Kim Il-sung's pictures in our homes. The pictures indicate that Kim Il-sung is God, as we hang the pictures for the purpose of reminding ourselves that we are dependent upon him. Still, another former North Korean states that having faith in God is an act of espionage. Only Kim Il-sung is a god in North Korea. You know, I imagine that this was much of the same attitude that Nimrod had in his conquest to rule the earth, to be the ruler of the whole world, starting right there at the Tower of Babel. And so this tower was both a governmental statement and a religious statement. Nimrod alone was to be the one world ruler, and from many secular historical accounts, Nimrod's wife, Semiramis, was the mother of all pagan idolatry. She had claimed that her son, who was born of an adulterous relationship apart from her husband Nimrod, she claimed that her son Tammuz was immaculately conceived and that Tammuz himself was the Son of God. Nimrod's desire to rule over the whole world was displayed in the building of the Tower of Babel. It wasn't just a nice piece of architecture. It made a very clear statement to the world. The Tower of Babel was a ziggurat. That's not a cigarette. It's a ziggurat. It's the name of a structure, the type of a building. It's a pyramid-shaped temple, much like the pyramids of Egypt and the mountain-shaped temple pyramids of the Aztecs. They wanted to ascend the Tower of Babel as a sacred mountain into the clouds, much like Satan's desire before his fall. Satan wants to be like God, and so he mimics God in every way he possibly can. And the people that Satan influences, they do the same. They want to be God. Nimrod himself was actually known as the sun god, and Semiramis became known as the moon goddess or the Virgin Mother. And their Babylonian religion was known as the mystery religion. You've heard that phrase, mystery, Babylon the Great? And the mystery was just this. This is the mystery in Mystery Babylon. Man trying to make himself out to be God. That's it. That's the big mystery of the religion. The tower was built to exalt man as God. The temple was believed to have the gods of the constellations or the star formations engraved all into the sides of this tower, this ziggurat. In the location of ancient Babylon today, the foundation of the ancient building still rests in the original place in the city of Babylon. They call it a mound, but I saw some pictures of it, and it definitely is the foundation of a building. It's just about 55 miles south of the city of Baghdad. Remember that Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild this particular ziggurat, but he was called off because of a war. I can't remember, was it America that had attacked Saddam, or was it some other country? But he had to leave the work. Nebuchadnezzar actually rebuilt the Tower of Babel. I don't know how far he got along in his project, but he had to leave off the building also because he was invaded by the Persians. And then the Persians just left it alone, and it just kind of reduced itself. Since it was made of mud and brick, the rain just kind of eroded it away until now it's just like the foundation. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about his visit to the ancient city of Babel in 440 BC. And that's just about 100 years after the Persians had conquered the Babylonians. Herodotus says, and I quote, "It has a solid central tower, 1 furlong square," and that's like a ziggurat. It's square, it's not round, spiral, "with a second erected on the top of it, and then a third, and so on up to 8. All 8 towers can be climbed by a spiral way running around the outside. And about halfway up, there are seats for those who make the journey to rest on." And the idea was that this tower would signify the tyrannical rule of Nimrod over the whole face of the earth. The tower was also a religious monument as well, where the whole world could worship together as one, and the God of Noah wouldn't be included. So was God worried that humans now would become too powerful for him to control if they learned to work together, as the atheists say? The men who had begun to construct this tower thought that it was so big and that it was so impressive that it would reach up to the heavens. But it reads in verse 5 that it was so small and it was so puny that God had to come way down from heaven even to get a look at this thing, this tower. And God refuses, I love this, God refuses to be taken out of the affairs of men, so he confounded their languages and he divided them to keep them from exalting themselves in this manner. God wasn't intimidated by their actions at all, as though they could somehow overthrow him and rule the earth by themselves. Satan has this same attitude that these men have, or these men, I should say, have the same attitude that Satan had when he was thrown down. So why not humble the men of the earth just as God had humbled Satan in heaven? The picture of Satan's fall is found in Isaiah chapter 14. If you want to turn there real quick. That's Isaiah chapter 14, starting at verse 12. Isaiah 14, 12 through 17, where it reads, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north." That's interesting when you read it, thinking about the Tower of Babel. He'll sit in the mount. This is a picture of Mount Babel, or the Tower of Babel, where man acting as God exalts himself in the Mount of Babel. In verse 14, Isaiah 14:14, he goes on, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake the kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof?" And this, now, back to our story in Genesis, is a picture of the fall of Babel. It's found in Genesis 11, verses 8 and 9, where it reads that the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Now the name Babylon was originally meant to be gateway of the gods. That's what it was supposed to mean. But the Hebrew meaning for the name Babel is confusion, which is the statement of man compared to the statement of God. They said, gateway of the gods. And God said, confusion. You guys are confused. In Genesis 2:7, it reads, and the Lord God formed the man of the dust of the ground. Are we gods? We're dust. We're created from the dust of the earth. In Psalm 103, verse 14, it reads, for he knoweth our frame, he remembereth that we are dust. And in Isaiah 40:15, it reads, behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket and are counted as the small dust of the scales. You know, pride really doesn't fit us. It doesn't. What do we have to be so prideful about? Humility fits us so much better. We have so much to be humble about, don't we? The term Babel is much like the noise that you would hear from a large crowd of people where there's a party and all these people are talking and you hear all these sounds, but you can't hear what anyone's saying. It's like confusion. It's like babbling. Now, do you think that this was harsh punishment that God had brought upon the men of Babel to confuse their languages and spread them around throughout the whole earth? Do you think that was a great punishment? When you wrap up the whole Bible in the grace of God, which we should do, it's easy to see that it was His grace that prevented God from destroying them all. If the people before the flood were destroyed because the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, and because their biggest sin before the flood seemed to be utter violence, then why shouldn't God destroy these men for trying to break free from His rule in the earth and establish their own society where God is not included and where He's not welcomed? You may have created us, God, but we can certainly run things better than you can. We'll govern ourselves and we'll worship man and his accomplishments rather than some invisible God in the heavens. That's what they were saying. The following definition of atheism was given at the Supreme Court of the United States in the case of Murray versus Curlett. Does that sound familiar to you? Murray versus Curlett? Me either. I just found it. But that was the case in 1963 to remove reverential Bible reading and oral unison recitation of the Lord's Prayer in the public schools. That's to take the Bible out of the schools, and they can't say the Lord's Prayer any longer in the public schools. And so this is what the atheists put forth in the definition of who they are. Let me read this to you. I quote, your petitioners are atheists, and they define their beliefs as follows. An atheist loves his fellow man instead of God. An atheist believes that heaven is something for which we should work now, here on earth, for all men together to enjoy. An atheist believes that he can get no help through prayer, but that he must find in himself the inner conviction and strength to meet life, to grapple with it, to subdue it, and to enjoy it. An atheist believes that only in knowledge of himself and a knowledge of his fellow man can he find the understanding that will help to a life of fulfillment. He seeks to know himself and his fellow man rather than to know a God. An atheist believes that a hospital should be built instead of a church. An atheist believes that a deed must be done instead of a prayer said. An atheist strives for involvement in life and not escape into death. He wants disease conquered, poverty vanquished, war eliminated. He wants man to understand and love man. He wants an ethical way of life. He believes that we cannot rely on a God or channel action into prayer, nor hope for an end of troubles in a hereafter. He believes that we are our brother's keepers and are keepers of our own lives. That we are responsible persons and the job is here and the time is now. Interesting, huh? The ingratitude of this statement is outstanding. One of the sins of depravity mentioned in Romans chapter 1 is the sin of ingratitude, being unthankful. All that we are is because of him. I think that these verses in Romans chapter 1, they fit together very well with this statement. It's in Romans 1, verses 18 through 23. It reads in Romans 1, starting at verse 18, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man." Interesting. That fits so well with that statement by the atheists and with what these men were doing at the Tower of Babel. These men had just recently come from a worldwide catastrophe. Noah walked 15 feet from the ark and he fell down and built an altar, and there he totally dedicated himself to the Lord. His descendants, on the other hand, they walked another 15 feet from the ark and they threw off all restraint, and they said, "We'll take it from here, God. You just leave us humans alone. We'll make our own path. We'll form our own government. We'll institute our own religion. You just leave us humans alone." In the book of Revelation, it speaks of a coming destruction of man's central seat of government and of his one world religion also. I find it interesting that this tower was left undone. They left off building the work. And in the end times, it seems like man is going to try to finish the tower once again, to unite the world together under the banner of man. Once again. I saw a picture of the European Parliament building with the flags of all the various nations lined up out front. And I don't know if the architects or the building designers were just trying to be clever, but the European Parliament building looks like an exact copy of some of the pictures of the Tower of Babel, with the front sort of left undone. And they did it on purpose. You take a picture of the Tower of Babel and look at the Parliament building, it's an exact replica. That's interesting, huh? This story in ancient history repeats itself in the end times. This is happening right now again before our eyes. That's why the book of Revelation calls the one world empire under the Antichrist Babylon, the mother of all harlots. Or it refers to this whole system of man's rule as the beast. The one world religion, the one world government, the one ruler of the world, all of it together is just called a beast. Babel, in the beginning, was led by the great rebel Nimrod. He sought to subdue the whole earth and bring under his rule all of mankind. And Babylon, in the end, has another man of sin who seeks to subdue the whole earth. And we know him as the Antichrist. In the end, he will try to bring all mankind under his rule also. In the beginning, the government of Babel united themselves together under man apart from God. In the end, the government of Babylon will do the same. Anyone who wants to buy or sell must have this governmental mark in their right hand or in their forehead. If you just want to get a cup of coffee at the Starbucks, you'll have to have the mark from the government. In the beginning, Babel was the attempt at a one world religion under Nimrod and Semiramis. In the end, Babylon will unite all the religions of the world under one man, and he'll declare himself as God, and he'll sit in the temple of God, and he'll ask to be worshiped as God. In the beginning, Babel, as one nation, tried to build a tower to heaven. And Babylon, in the end, will declare their victory over God when they defeat his two witnesses in the earth, who came to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to a dying world during the Great Tribulation. When the Antichrist kills them, he allows their dead bodies to lie in the streets for 3 days, and the whole earth at that time will celebrate their deaths by exchanging gifts throughout the whole world. Just like Christmas. Which, to me, I find is very interesting because Tammuz, the illegitimate son of Semiramis, was said to have been born on December 25th. And they celebrated his birth every year by decorating trees with silver and gold and exchanging presents. Very interesting, huh? And in the end, they're going to celebrate in the same manner when they kill God's two witnesses, who the whole earth will know very well at that time, and that they're sent from God. And I hope that doesn't ruin anybody's Christmas. Oh, that's it. I'm not getting a tree. That's it. No presents for my kids. In the beginning at Babel, God humbled them and he divided the nations. But in the end, in Babylon, the great harlot, God will humble the nations of the world, and Christ shall reign for 1,000 years in the earth. And the glory of the Lord will fill the whole earth. And all the nations will be subject unto him. It'll be the first time that the world has been at peace with God and been at peace with one another since the paradise of the Garden of Eden. The first time since Eden, when Christ reigns again for 1,000 years. In God's grace, he confounded the languages of men at Babel and had given the world, listen to this, God had given the world time. God gives the world time. Time to receive his Son, the only begotten Son of God. Then after that, time for his Son to gather up peoples from all the various nations and languages of the earth to be the subjects of his glorious kingdom, where he shall rule and reign forever and ever. Amen. In Romans 11:5, it reads that when the fullness of the Gentiles is come in, then salvation will come to the whole earth in the person of Jesus Christ. Or when the time that all the people from all the nations of the world will be saved, then God will save Israel as well, and will all rule and reign with our Lord Jesus Christ. That's amazing. Now, God's rejection of this one world government and religion and how he separated them at the Tower of Babel, he reversed it in the first few verses of our next chapter, in chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. And we'll go over that next week, but let me just read it to you. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Isn't that awesome? It would seem like God punished the whole world by splitting them all up into these various nations, but really what he's doing is he's giving them more time in his grace. And then he raises up through one man, Abraham, a seed, a savior. And he establishes that nation as the people of God as a testimony to his grace. The nation of Israel, he didn't save them because they're so great. They are simply a testimony of the grace of God. Just like you in your life, you're a testimony of the grace of God. And God had begun to fulfill his promise already in the day of Pentecost, where he began to bless all the nations of the earth in the seed, singular, of Abraham. Or as we've been saying through our studies, the seed of the woman, Christ, born of a virgin, Lord of all and Savior of all. Now in the next portion of chapter 11, it goes back over another genealogy, and we're going to get through this pretty quick, so please be patient. This genealogy listed here falls back now to the royal line. And you know what that royal line is, right? It's the line up to Christ. And God loves the whole world, but his plan of salvation, it goes through this one thread, or this royal line, from Shem now, who had just come off of the ark, to Christ. But this genealogy happens to stop here in chapter 11 at Abraham. And for the rest of the book of Genesis, we go from the whole world to one family. From all the nations being scattered to just one man, really. The major portion of the rest of the book of Genesis focuses now on Abraham. And so let's read this genealogy together. It's like a tongue twister. In verse 10, it reads, These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begot Arphaxad 500 years and begot sons and daughters. So they lived further than just 70 years after the flood. And I think that a lot of it had to do with the gene pool. As the gene pool became more corrupted, then their lifespan dwindled down, and God, I think it's just pretty much God set the bar. He set the barrier at about 75 years. Verse 12, And Arphaxad lived 35 years and begot Salah. And Arphaxad lived after he begot Salah 403 years and begot sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years and begot Eber. And Salah lived after he begot Eber 403 years and begot sons and daughters. And Eber lived 430 years and begot Peleg. And Eber lived after he begot Peleg 430 years and begot sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years and begot Reu. And Peleg lived after he begot Reu 209 years and begot sons and daughters. And Peleg's days were the days of the Tower of Babel. Remember, Peleg, his name means division. And that was when the dividing of the nations took place. And his son, Reu, seemed to have stayed within the vicinity of Babel, the land of Shinar, or the area of Chaldea near to Babylon. Verse 20, and Reu lived 32 years and begot Serug. And Reu lived after he begot Serug 207 years and begot sons and daughters. And Serug lived 30 years and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begot Nahor 200 years and he begot sons and daughters. And Nahor lived 29 years and begot Terah. And Nahor lived after he begot Terah 119 years and begot sons and daughters. So you can see the lifespan is getting shorter as we go down just through this list. And Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Here's the first mention of the man Abraham. His name was Abram at this time in verse 26. But Abraham is a very important man in history. I like to ask the questions, if there's a chat discussion room or just with some friends, who's the most influential man in human history ever? Who would you guys say? Who's the most influential man in human history? Crickets. No, who would you guys say? Okay, I'll tell you if you guys are being shy. Jesus. He was a man. He was a man. He walked the face of the earth as a man. Jesus was the most influential man ever in human history. More people know about Jesus. More books were written about Jesus. Jesus has changed more people's lives than any other person ever. Somebody told me it was Martin Luther King Jr., and I said, he was a great man, but not even close to Jesus. Who do you think was the second? Well, just anywhere. Well, the secular world, they won't agree with even Jesus. Who do you think? Oh, Gutenberg? Yeah. But he didn't influence people like Moses did. Honestly, I would say that Moses is the second. The Islamic religion, they received Moses. And then, honestly, I believe that after that, it was either Adam or it was Abraham. And I would give Abraham the nod, really, because of his influence throughout all of human history, not just 2012 in Southern California, but throughout all history. I would say Abraham. And it's true, Abraham is one of the most influential men who ever lived. And to us also, because he's a great man of faith. He was a mighty man of faith. And God chose him to be the father of a nation, the nation of Israel. In verse 27, it reads, now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. So it seems like the death of Abraham's brother Haran, Abram at this time, he took Haran's son Lot and he raised him as his own. I mean, it seemed like they were all together as one family. But after Abraham's father Terah had died, Lot stayed with Abram. And we'll read more about Lot later on in the book of Genesis. In verse 29, and Abram and Nahor took them wives, and the name of Abram's wife was Sarai. Sarai? Or Sarai? I'll just say Sarai. And the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. They're just one big happy family. And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So this is a city of Haran, not the brother of Abram, because his brother's name was Haran also.